Welcome everybody to a session on the Bhagavad Gita. Today is the introductory session, and I want to make this session, each session, as interactive as possible. Part of the time will be spent in putting down some ideas, and the rest of it will be open to questions from you people. So I will suggest that if you can use the Zoom group chat, and if you use the Zoom group chat, I can see the questions that are useful and relevant to all, and then I can speak on them directly. If you have no access to the Zoom chat, or you don't have access because you are in live streaming, you can, those of you who know me, can message me directly on WhatsApp, and I will pick up the questions from the WhatsApp. So I want to discuss the context of the Bhagavad Gita and from where Bhagavad Gita originally started. And Bhagavad Gita is contained in the Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata. And since it comes from the Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata, it is an integral part of the Mahabharata. And it's an integral part of the Mahabharata. And many people ask, you must know something about the Mahabharata if you want to understand the Bhagavad Gita. Because the Bhagavad Gita is set in the Mahabharata. You cannot take the Bhagavad Gita out of the Mahabharata and then apply all kinds of meanings to it. What is unique about the Mahabharata is, and unique about the Bhagavad Gita, is that the Bhagavad Gita has got so many people who have written commentaries on it. Thousands and thousands of commentaries have been written on it. And these thousands of commentaries that have been written on it are commentaries which have been not agreeing on so many issues. Some of them feel it is entirely allegorical or metaphorical. Some of them believe that it is mythological. Others believe that one group says that it is about this philosophy, and another says it is about the other philosophy. And these arguments go on and on and on and on. So initially, I would like to start by setting the stage of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, so that you have an idea what the Bhagavad Gita is trying to say. So the Bhagavad Gita was spoken at a time when there was a lot of confusion in the land. In fact, all of you who have seen Mahabharata on television will note that it starts with Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam shrijami aham. So the purpose, he says, for his incarnation or his avatar in the Bhagavad Gita, he says that he appears whenever there is a decline in dharma and whenever there is a rise in adharma. And for this purpose, he comes on this earth, and he comes to re-establish the principles of religion and clarify what is dharma and what is not dharma. So, and the way he does it is so beautiful and so unique that everybody, regardless of their philosophy, is able to find something in the Bhagavad Gita and say Bhagavad Gita is about what their philosophy is. This is the uniqueness of the Bhagavad Gita. Those who follow Advait philosophy will say that Bhagavad Gita is all about Advait philosophy. Those who follow Dvait philosophy will say it's all about Dvaita philosophy. Those who uh, believe in yoga will quote the Bhagavad Gita and say that Krishna says that, "O Arjuna, be a yogi." Those who believe in bhakti will point out that Bhagavad Gita is all about bhakti. Those who believe in work will point out that the Bhagavad Gita speaks about work as a means for salvation. Those who believe in the Jnana Marg will say that knowledge is the means for salvation. And in this way, everyone will give their own perspective. And if that's not enough, notable people, great saints, leaders of sampradayas have all written their own versions of the Bhagavad Gita which stress certain aspects of the philosophy. There are people like Tilak and Gandhi who have written on the Bhagavad Gita from a political perspective. There are people who have written Bhagavad Gita to establish the sampradayas like Shankaracharya, like Madhvacharya, like so many other great leaders have, spiritual leaders have written their views on the Bhagavad Gita. So to understand where we start in Bhagavad Gita or why Bhagavad Gita appears so diverse in the philosophies it contains, you must understand that the Bhagavad Gita is a very unique book. It comes at a time, it's spoken at a time when there was a lot of spiritual ferment that was going on in the country. Just like today's Silicon Valley is, the hotbed for startups that are coming up. Similarly, India in those days was a hotbed for spiritual startups. And everybody came up with their own philosophies, everyone came up with their own religions, and everyone looked to the scriptures to find something that would support what they were saying. There were philosophies that believed in God, there were philosophies that did not believe in God, there were philosophies that believed in the law of karma, there were philosophies that had other views, there were philosophies that believed in working in everyday life and living with their family. There were other philosophies who insisted that you could not attain salvation unless you abandoned the world and you took to a life of asceticism and renunciation. So to put it very broadly, at the time when Bhagavad Gita was spoken, there were two sets of philosophies. One set of philosophy was Astikya philosophy. Astikya philosophy are those philosophies that accepted the Bhagavad Gita, or rather, Astikya philosophies were those that accepted the Vedas. And Nashtikya philosophies were those that did not accept the Vedas. So in the Astikya philosophies that accepted the Vedas, you had Sankhya philosophy, you had yoga philosophy, you had Pancharatra philosophy, you had Karma Kanda or Karma Mimamsa philosophy, and so on. And in the Nastikya philosophies, you had Shramana philosophies, because Bhagavad Gita was spoken at a time when Buddhism and Jainism had not yet manifested. And since they had not yet manifested, the early Buddhism or early Jainism were both part of a vast mass of philosophies which were called Shramana philosophies, which were about asceticism, which were about renunciation. So these were called Shramana philosophies, and these philosophies came up with the idea of the law of karma. And what Bhagavad Gita does is that it takes all the Ashtikya philosophies, which is Sankhya, Yoga, Karma Mimamsa, Pancharatra, And taking them all, it integrates them. It brings about a synthesis between them. And while many of these philosophies in their original form were directly contradicting each other, when they were integrated in the Bhagavad Gita, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, actually brings about a syncretic union. That means it brings philosophies that were apparently opposing one another and brings about a resolution between them. For example, there were people who believed in renunciation, external renunciation. And on the other hand, you had people who believed in living in the world and performing Vedic sacrifice. So the Bhagavad Gita brought them together and said that renunciation is very important, but that renunciation should be internal. Externally, you have to fulfill your duty. But that duty is performed not for the sake of the fruit, but it is performed because it is your duty and is a sacrifice to God. And this will result in your salvation. So on one side, you had salvation-centric philosophies. On the other side, you had philosophies that were very worldly. So they were called pravritti marg and nivritti marg. And the Bhagavad Gita brings together pravritti and nivritti. It brings together renunciation and worldly behavior. So that the idea was that internally you have to behave in a spirit of renunciation, but externally you have to fulfill all your duties. And this way he brought about a synthesis between pravritti and nivritti. Nivritti internally and pravritti apparently externally. But essentially he made the religious life, which was following the Vedas, made it from being sacrifice oriented for the result of fruit. Because one school of thought believed, Karma Kanda believed, that you had to perform Vedic sacrifice. You had to do your duty in the world and you had to fulfill your obligations, social, etc. And then your religious obligations, which were to do with performing Vedic sacrifice, fire sacrifice. And the performance of these sacrifices would result in a better birth. It would result in a birth where you were born in a higher strata of society. You would be born more beautiful. You would be born in a family which would give you more knowledge, and you would also be more wealthy. On the other hand, you had the people from the Nivritti Marg, and the people from the Nivritti Marg said, forget about the world. This world is a place of suffering. And since this is a place of suffering where birth and death and old age and disease, fault, misfortune and happiness, which is guaranteed to everybody, will cause you suffering, you don't try for rebirth. You become free from the cycle of birth and death. What you should do is that you should strive to attain salvation. And to attain salvation, you must give up your attachments to the world and demonstrate this by living the life of an ascetic, of a yati, of a sannyasi. And by doing that, living in the forests, living in the mountains, you will attain the salvation that you are seeking. Now, what was done in the Bhagavad Gita, or what is done in the Bhagavad Gita, is an integration of both of them. That insists that you do your job, you do your duty, you fulfill your responsibilities, and simultaneously you attain salvation, because internally, which really matters, you are situated on a platform of renunciation. I'll pause here. If anyone has any questions, I'll take those questions and then we can go on to the next idea. Does anyone have any questions here?
हाँ दादी.
Yes?
पहले वो बना देती दादी.
Hello?
खाली थोड़ा गिद्दा साफ कर रही थी आपका.
Request you to please keep yourself on mute. If you have any questions for doctor, you may please ask.
थोड़ा सा आगे थोड़ा सा आगे.
Yes, any questions? All right, we did the section which deals with Pravritti and Nivritti. There are some questions. So this is a question which says, just listening to Bhagavad Gita is enough, or we have to recite shlokas also is important? Well, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the most purificatory texts, and it is, shall we say, a song. In short, Bhagavad Gita means song of God. So, if you are studying the Bhagavad Gita as a believer in the Bhagavad Gita and a believer in the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, then to recite the verses of the Bhagavad Gita is a very, very powerful and very, very useful way of purifying your mind. So, whether you're listening, whether you're chanting, whether you're reading the message, all of these are useful and all of these are purificatory. Does that answer your question? So as I pointed out, there is a section, you will see that the Bhagavad Gita brings about an integration, a synthesis, a syncretism between opposing philosophies. And what it does is that it brings about all the Ashtikya philosophies, all the philosophies that follow the Vedas, all the philosophies where people believe in God, all the theistic philosophies are all integrated in the Bhagavad Gita. Therefore, you will find people who will say that Bhagavad Gita is about Advait. Others will say it's about Dvait. And what is the correct answer? The correct answer is it gives both. And it integrates both. On the platform of Sankhya, it explains that there is Purush and there is Prakriti. Clearly Dvait. Clearly two. But then, having done that, it subsumes both Purush and Prakriti to a higher goal. And that higher goal that it integrates it with is Brahman. So you have Dvait, you also have Brahman. And yet, it also is not monistic alone, but it is also theistic. It also points out that there is God who is beyond Brahman. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out, Brahmano hi pratishtha aham. I am the source, I am the root, I am the support of Brahman. So there is God, then there is Brahman, then there is Purush, and then there is Prakriti. So if you look at it from that perspective, and we will be clarifying it in greater detail as I go into the Bhagavad Gita from the initial overview that we will cover, and then also when we discuss the other aspects of the Bhagavad Gita, you will understand what I am speaking about. But it includes both Advaita and it includes Dvaita also. So it fully satisfies the claims that it is Advaita Vedanta. It fully satisfies the claims that it is Dvaita, and it satisfies those who say that You should be in an attitude of renunciation. It also fulfills the stand of those who believe that you have to fulfill your performance and you'll have to fulfill your duty. Essentially, the Bhagavad Gita is a karma busting book. Now, why do I say it's a karma busting book? Because at the time when the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, you had a philosophy which was the philosophy of karma, which was confusing and causing great sorrow and pain to people who had to go out into the world and perform activities that involved violence. So many kings abandoned their kingdoms. Many Kshatriyas laid down their arms. And the reason they did that was because they were afraid of the law of karma and how it would affect them. In fact, this is also the position of Arjun on the battlefield. And we will go into that later in greater detail. But Arjun is paralyzed by fear of karma. And if you examine his lament, which is described largely in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, is about how he will be afflicted by karma when he kills those people who are opposing him on the battlefield. Now, this lament was not the lament of Arjuna alone. It was a lament of many other Kshatriyas, many other kings. We see that after the Bhagavad Gita also, we had the example of Buddha who gave up his kingdom. We have the example of Mahavir who gave up his kingdom. And both of these founded Jainism and Buddhism and Jainism. And in this way, society was falling apart. It was falling apart because people were afraid of karma and they were paralyzed by it. I am going to have one or maybe two sessions on why bad things happen to good people and explain to you in detail what the law of karma is. And thereafter, I will deal with how Bhagavad Gita gives you the answer on how to become free from karma. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, you have many philosophies. You have Sankhya Yoga or Sankhya philosophy. You have Yoga philosophy, which is about Dhyan Yoga meditation. You have Pancharatra philosophy, or the philosophy of Bhagavat Marg, the philosophy of worship of the divine form of the Lord. That is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna. You have also Vedanta, which is describing how everything comes and is subsumed under the one all-pervading Brahman. It also contains that philosophy in greater detail, the discussion of Sankhya, and it discusses the various aspects of Prakriti. So in this way, the Bhagavad Gita contains multiple philosophies. And because it contains multiple philosophies, you need to understand that you will find whatever you want to say about Bhagavad Gita can hardly be wrong, because there will be something in the Bhagavad Gita that supports what you're saying. So they say the Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 sections. From first chapter to the 6th chapter is about the individual soul. From the 7th chapter to the 12th chapter is about God. From the 13th chapter to the 18th chapter is about Prakriti and how we become free from Prakriti. Other people have described Bhagavad Gita's divisions in a different way. They've said that the first 6 chapters deal essentially with Karma Yoga, the next 6 chapters deal with Bhakti Yoga, and the last 6 chapters essentially deal with Jnana Yoga. But of course, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you will find that the Bhagavad Gita contains all 3 yogas in all 3 sections. And since you find that it will contain all 3 yogas in all 3 sections, You can't say that it is strictly compartmentalized into, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. Although there is greater emphasis on each of these yogas in these three sections. The Bhagavad Gita also contains knowledge of different aspects which are spread out throughout the chapters, just like pearls are spread across a pearl necklace. So also gems of knowledge are spread across various chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. So if you are trying to do just one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you will often become confused. And very often people who give lectures on the Bhagavad Gita and speak only on one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita will cover only one aspect of it. It's like the 6 blind men of Hindustan who went to see an elephant, where one of them feels the tail and says it's like a rope. Someone feels the trunk and he says that it is like a snake. One feels the side of the elephant and says it's like a wall. Another feels the legs of the elephant and says it's like a tree. So Bhagavad Gita is like that. If you try to look at it in individual aspects, you will get confused. So the reason why I am going to cover this in one sessions of overview, and the overview will contain who is God, who am I, why do bad things happen to good people, how to overcome the law of karma, leaving this body, different types of yoga. Each of these yogas I will discuss. And in this way, I will cover an overview of the Bhagavad Gita following this introductory lecture. And then I will go into the Bhagavad Gita chapter by chapter, verse by verse. But I would like this to be an interactive session. So I would seriously request you to ask questions. So if you ask questions, then I can answer those questions and, we can have an open discussion. Somebody has asked, what about Ashtavakra Gita? The first Gita is Bhagavad Gita. After that, there were many imitators. So you have Guru Gita, you have Ashtavakra Gita, you have Uddhav Gita, you have Avdut Gita. In the Mahabharata itself, you have what we call as the Butcher's Gita. So there are many Gitas. So since there are so many Gitas, we will not concentrate on other Gitas. We will focus only on Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is the most profound, it is the most, it contains the maximum number of philosophies, it answers all questions. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that when I have told you all about everything that you need to know, there will be nothing more to be known. So the idea is you will not need to know anything more after you know what Bhagavad Gita contains. Okay, so there's some other questions. Is there a difference in the interpretation of Gitas from the original one written in Sanskrit? The original one is written in Sanskrit, but if you want to project your philosophy, and this was because the Bhagavad Gita was part of what we call as a Prashtantrayi. Prashtantrayi means there were 3 pillars. One was the Brahma Sutra or the Vedanta Sutra, there was the Upanishads, and there was the Bhagavad Gita. And if you could write a commentary on these, which was different from the commentaries that existed before that, you could start your own sampradaya. So it became very popular that if you could interpret each of these 3 pillars of philosophy with your own philosophy, overlay your philosophy on them through your interpretation, it would become, you would have the right to start your own sampradaya. So in this manner, there are many interpretations of Bhagavad Gita which were performed for the sake of starting sampradayas and based upon individual interpretations and based upon the mental perspective of many people. And as many minds there are, that many interpretations there are. But I am going to try to look at the Bhagavad Gita from a non-denominational perspective. I'm trying to give you the Bhagavad Gita with the least amount of overlay of other people's philosophies or other people's interpretations, because I want you to follow the Bhagavad Gita in a very simple manner and in a manner wherein you can actually apply this philosophy in your everyday life. If you cannot apply what I'm saying in your everyday life, I will consider this to have not succeeded. So there's a question which says, what is the meaning of Brahman as per Bhagavad Gita and how is it different from God? Well, I will have to give you a verse from another scripture which is called the Bhagavad Purana, a more recent scripture. And in that it is described that Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yaj jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagwaniti shabdyate. That God is realized in three ascending levels of realization. And these ascending levels of realization is God is realized as Brahman, God is realized as Paramatma, and God is realized as Bhagavan. The analogy used is when you are lying in your bedroom and from your window sunshine enters the room and it pervades the room. You say the sun has entered my room, but actually it's only the sunshine. So that sunshine is metaphorically compared to Brahman. And if there is a mirror that is facing the window and you look into that mirror, you will find that the sun, the rising sun, is reflected in that mirror. And you will say, hey, look at the reflection of the sun. Look at that sun which is in my mirror. Similarly, when you look into your heart, you will experience that God is seated in your heart. And that experience of God who is situated in your heart is the experience of Paramatma. And then when you look out of the window and you look at the rising sun in all its glory, then you realize that that sun is the source of the sunshine that is all pervading in your room. And it is also the source of the reflection in your mirror. So when you know Bhagwan, that realization of Bhagwan, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, is understanding the source of the all-pervading Brahman and understanding the source of that reflection in your heart, which is known as Paramatma. I hope that answers your question. Hello? Yeah. Yes, any other questions does anyone have before I go on? We've roughly finished half the time, and I would really love to have the other half of the time dedicated to answering questions directly so that it becomes a direct conversation between us rather than a broadcast. Because a broadcast is like reading a book. But if you ask questions and I am able to talk to you, then it becomes more like an interactive discussion. Whichever you prefer, whatever you find better, I am willing to do. Yes, anyone else?
I'm listening.
Yes. Would this person who asked the question, what would be the ultimate teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, like to speak directly on the... Hello? So the question is, what would be the ultimate teaching of the Bhagavad Gita? The ultimate teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is to help you to realize who am I, to realize who is God, to establish your relationship between you and God, so that you can become free from bondage to this world or the law of karma, and so that you can attain salvation or connect with God through the act of yoga. Does it answer your question, madam? So there is a question here which says, would absorbing Bhagavad Gita make a person less aggressive in callings that require one to be forthright? Well, the answer to that question is that Bhagavad Gita is not about being passive. How can Bhagavad Gita make you less aggressive when the purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to make Krishna act appropriately? So Bhagavad Gita is about appropriate action. So you will be aggressive where you need to be aggressive, and you will be peaceful where you need to be peaceful. It will not be based upon your emotions, but based upon the need of the circumstances. There are two types of emotions. There are emotions where you become reactive, and there are emotions where the emotion is summoned up as a proactive emotion. So, a reactive emotion is where somebody presses your buttons from outside, and proactive is where you summon up those emotions that are required to get a task done. Now, Bhagavad Gita is about becoming completely free from reactive emotion, but it is also about enabling the warrior to go out and fight his war. So, you don't become less aggressive, you don't become more aggressive. Let us say that you become equanimous, and on that platform of equanimity, on that platform of samatha, on that platform of sthita prajna, you then attain that ability to become whatever you need to be at that time. If you need to be a warrior, you act as a warrior. If you need to be a peacemaker, you act as a peacemaker. The Bhagavad Gita was not spoken to somebody who was wanting to become a king out of his personal selfish greed. These people wanted to kill the Pandavas. They wanted to destroy them. All attempts at mediation had failed. They were willing to accept one village for each Pandav. But the argument given by Duryodhana is that I will not give them as much land as sits on the head of a pin. For a Kshatriya to be able to rule is part of his self-actualization process. It is his swadharma. It helps him to attain connection to and union with God. So it is their spiritual right to perform their job, their duty, their swadharma. And they were being prevented from that. Further than that, they were also being threatened with death. So the war, from the perspective of the Pandavas, was a last resort. It was not the first choice. So they were peaceful as long as they were asked to be peaceful, but when they had no choice, they chose to respond as a Kshatriya responds. So also, if you follow the principles of the Bhagavad Gita, the objective is that you will find peace within, but you will be able to act as necessary in the world. Does that answer your question? Somebody has asked the reference of 18 adhyayas, 18 akshahunis, 18 vardhas. See, I don't want to get into the numerology of the whole thing. Number 9 is a very significant number, and I don't want to get into numerology, so it's not relevant to the philosophy here. But we can discuss that separately if you mail me. How does Bhagavad Gita compare to other spiritual texts like the Vedas or Upanishads? What do the Vedas comprise of? What do the Upanishads comprise of? And what do the Puranas comprise of? So, the Bhagavad Gita, it is described, contains the distillate of the Upanishads. So, it has been described that the Upanishads are the cows. Krishna is the cowherd boy, and he has milked the Upanishads, the cows, and taken out the milk and prepared the butter and cream which he makes available in the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita contains many verses from the Upanishads, and not only does it contain many verses from the Upanishads, it also contains the philosophy of many of the Upanishads. In some cases, you will find there is practically word for word repetition of certain Upanishadic verses in the Bhagavad Gita, and that I can illustrate to you as we go on into the Bhagavad Gita further. So the Vedas themselves are divided into broadly one part which are the prayers and the hymns, one part which are the Vedic sacrifices, and one part which is the philosophical portion. So the philosophical portion is called the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita helps to extract the best of the knowledge from the Upanishads and make it available in the Bhagavad Gita. So does Bhagavad Gita make you a better human being? Yes, if you read Bhagavad Gita for the sake of following the principles of the Bhagavad Gita, implementing them in your life, certainly you will become transformed. It is, if you were to read one book from Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, etc., the purpose is that if you can read Bhagavad Gita and you can integrate that into your life, the philosophy as well as the devotion to the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, it will certainly transform you. The real purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to remember God and forget yourself. And the more you are absorbed in God, the less you are absorbed in yourself. And the more you are absorbed in God, and the more you forget yourself, you become less self-centered, you become less selfish, and therefore you become a more selfless person. You become an instrument of God. So that would make you a better human being, because instead of being self-centered, you will be other-centered. You will be more empathetic, you will be more compassionate, you will be more altruistic. You will, by following the Bhagavad Gita, you will fulfill all your duties and obligations towards your family, towards your workplace, towards your friends, towards your society. You will be performing all your duties, and therefore you will be a far, far better human being than people who are not doing that. I hope that answers your question. So coming back to the question of Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, I pointed out that the later part of the Bhagavad Gita, of the Upanishad, of the Vedas is called the Upanishads. So the essence of that is contained in the Bhagavad Gita. The Puranas are much later texts, and those later texts were made to incorporate various other beliefs and philosophies that were existent at that time. You see, the uniqueness of this country is that every 500 miles the language changes. If the language doesn't change, at least the dialect changes. And if you go with the change of language, you will find there will be a different Gram Devi or a Gram Devta, or there will be different forms of worship. In one part of the country, they will worship God in one form. In another part of the country, they will worship God in another form. In this way, you will find that there is a lot of difference. And the Puranas were written to bring people who are following different faiths ultimately under one umbrella philosophy. So there were 6 Puranas that were meant for people who were in Tamagun, there were 6 Puranas that were meant for those in Rajagun, and there are 6 Puranas which were meant for those in Sattvagun. And thus it provided spiritual instruction in simple story format for everybody. I hope that is answering your question. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Wow, mummy. What a wow.
ಸ್ನಾನ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬರ್ಲಾ ಸ್ನಾನ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬರ್ಲಾ
There's too much noise in the background. Please mute.
So, doctor, I have a question.
Gita.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah, 1 minute. Let me just answer this question. He says, how old is the Bhagavad Gita? The Bhagavad Gita is timeless. It is not only timeless, it is eternal. The Bhagavad Gita is the song of God. Historians, academicians may try to position the Bhagavad Gita and try to find out when the Bhagavad Gita began. We do know that the Bhagavad Gita was considerably before the advent of Jainism and Buddhism. So before Mahavir and before Buddha, and probably more than 3,500 years before Christ, the Bhagavad Gita appeared and was spoken. So there are those who say that it is, more than 5,000 years. There are others who say it is, there's an argument of years here and there. But it is, as I said, important thing is to accept Bhagavad Gita as being eternal and not having any beginning. Does that answer your question, sir? Hello. The next question that is being asked is, does Bhagavad Gita mention anything of the law of attraction? It speaks of the law of attraction between you and God. That is the essence of the core of the Bhagavad Gita. The law of attraction between you and God. And your absorption in God will make you forget yourself. And to be attracted to God, you have to learn to be unattracted to the world. So, attraction to God is directly proportional to your attraction to the world. directly opposite to your attraction to the world. So it's essentially the relationship between yourself and God. Even while you fulfill all your obligations, duties, and responsibilities towards other people, in your family, in your society, at your workplace, towards your nation. But essentially, I would like to say that as a person becomes more selfless, as they become more other-centered, as they become more compassionate and altruistic, it is only natural that people are attracted to them. So, in a sense, by learning to become selfless, you also become, shall we say, more amenable to attracting other people. How does one approach if one is on the fence between atheism and believing in God? Well, Bhagavad Gita is about the song of God. So if you're an atheist, then this is not the book for you. There are other philosophies that deal with atheistic approaches to spirituality that include Buddhism. But essentially, if you are doubtful about God, you cannot continue on this path. Ashraddhadhana purusha dharmasyasya parantapa aprapya mam nivartante mrityu sansara vartmani. On this path, if you don't have faith, you cannot continue and you will come back into the cycle of birth and death, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. But Shraddhaval labate jnanam tat parat samyat indriya. Jnana labdva param shantim chirenadi gacchati. That for one who has faith in God, to him knowledge is given. So the relationship has to be built between you and God. If you keep speaking to God, God will speak to you. When God speaks to you, you will get faith. You have to nurture that faith, and that faith will become love. So that is what Bhagavad Gita is about. So Mahabharata, is it similar to Bhagavad Gita? As I explained, Bhagavad Gita is contained in Mahabharata. It is contained in the Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata. So Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata are inseparable. They are part of each other. So another question is, does one need to have Gyan Bhakti and Karma Yoga to realize God, or one needs to follow only one path? Now you will see when we do Bhagavad Gita in greater detail that these paths are not separate from one another. All of them are all integrated in each chapter. So while there are some chapters that focus more on Karma Yoga, more on Jnana Yoga, more on Bhakti Yoga, ultimately the Bhagavad Gita is about integration of all of them. And since it involves integration of all of them, to the extent that you are inclined towards knowledge, you follow Jnana Yoga. To the extent that you have duties within the world, perform Karma Yoga. To the extent that you have emotions, use them and direct them to God in Bhakti Yoga. So in this way, you will be able to follow all the yogas and integrate them into your personality. How do we become selfless? By having no desires, expectations. First of all, you have to come to the realization of the Bhagavad Gita, where Bhagavad Gita, God is doing everything through Prakriti. If you just do your job, if you perform your obligations and your duties and your responsibilities, God will see that what He believes is best for you will be given to you. You don't have to expect anything. Expectation leads to sorrow, expectation leads to disappointment. You have to simply Offer yourself to God in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion. Perform all your activities with an attitude of Om Tat Sat. Lord, this is for you. Yat karoshi yadashnasi yat juhosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpana. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, everything, Krishna says, do it for me. If you do it in that way, God will take care of you. And it's always important to let God give you what He thinks is good for you rather than to expect Him to give something that you want. It was Oscar Wilde who said that when God wants to punish you, He fulfills your desires. So, there are many movies made on this, where the person wants something and then he insists that God gives it to him. And then when God gives him what he wants, he realizes that that's not what he wants. If the popular narrative says that religion is a psychological construct for humans to live better, then is God real? Can we have that mic off, please? Because still some mic is making a noise. Spirituality is a search for the absolute truth. And religion is the social, cultural, ethnic, linguistic infrastructure that makes this search possible and supports you in your spiritual endeavor. You will find that there are more people who find relief through religion than through psychology. Psychology has been trying for a long time now to fill the place which has been created by religion. But religion has not been replaced. And it is people who follow religion and are sincere about their practice of religion, who have less visits to the doctors, who have more immunity to falling ill, unlike other people, and who have greater peace of mind. So these are popular dialogues that are given, that religion is a psychological construct, or religion is the opium of the people. But all these people who've given these theories have all failed, whereas religion has seen to it that it has continued. All these people are dead, buried, cremated, and religion has continued in full strength. So whatever your religion may be, if you find comfort in religion, that itself is fulfilling and satisfying. Can you please explain a bit more your very first comment? What is that first comment? Hello? Which comment are you referring to, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, when you just began explaining your point
Yeah.
that religion helps one seek out the real spiritual truth.
Yeah, it's the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure that helps, supports your spiritual endeavor. Religion is a social, cultural, ethnic, ritualistic, language, music, infrastructure which supports your spiritual endeavor. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thanks.
So there's another question. Shouldn't we humans have desires and ambitions? Of course, It is natural to have desires, it is natural to have ambitions. There is no doubt about that. But the fact is, man proposes and God disposes. Everyone has desires and ambitions, but as it has been said, life is what happens to you while you make other plans. So it's easy to keep making plans, having desires and having ambitions. It is easier to trust in God, have an open mind, and look for opportunities where God is helping you to move on and ahead with your life. Does it answer your question? Would you like to speak? Please go ahead and speak if you wish. If it's not adequate, please tell me. I will speak further on this.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah, tell me.
Like you said one thing that we shouldn't ask exactly. I don't remember. But you said like we shouldn't ask for something, and you know, not able to explain. But little confused. Like, should we have those desires and ambitions? Should we go on for achieving all those things, or like no?
Of course you should. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday deshe arjuna tisthati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantrarudani maya. Tam eva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapshashi shashvatam. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am seated in your heart and I am driving you onward towards your destiny. You are merely seated in a machine made of material energy. Simply surrender to this Lord in your heart and you will attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. If you can connect with that Lord in your heart, He will direct you what He wants you to do. And so that you can differentiate the voice of that Lord in your heart from the other voices of lust, greed, anger, envy, illusion, and madness, you need to focus on God in a way that you remember God and forget self. Does it answer your question, sir?
Doctor, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Doctor, you mentioned in one of your thoughts that one shouldn't ask God what he or she wants, but rather let God decide. And I'm talking from a personal experience. I mean, if you have someone who is terminally ill in your family, do you not ask God to heal him or her? And this, and a more broader question is, how do you then justify or say कि मतलब whatever is happening for good? I mean, especially for this example, terminal illness, or maybe for other difficult circumstances.
I think the first thing you need to understand about the Bhagavad Gita is the Bhagavad Gita helps you to understand that whoever you see as terminally ill is never going to die. Avinashi tu tad viddhi yena sarvam idam tatam. That which pervades the body of the person who is dear to you, even if his body is terminally ill, that which pervades his body is indestructible, avinashi. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. From infancy to childhood to youth to maturity to old age, and finally at the time of death, the soul moves from one body to the next. Vasanshi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grinati naro parani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnanya anyani saunyati navani dehi. Just as you cast off your worn out clothes and put on fresh clothes, so also the soul casts off its body when it's no longer useful for it and puts on a new body. Shariram yad avapnoti yachapyutkramati ishvara grihitvaitani samyati vayur gandhani va ashayat. The soul moves from one body to the next, carrying with it the impressions of the previous life, just like the breeze carries the fragrance of a flower. Utkramantam sthitam vapi bhunjanam va gunan vitan mudo nano pashyanti jnana chakshusha. How the soul moves from one body to the other cannot be understood by a person, by the ordinary person. But one whose eyes have been anointed with the collyrium, the kajal of knowledge, that person can understand, and therefore he does not grieve. So you have to understand that that person who is terminally ill is not going to die. That the vehicle that he is in at present, I don't know what is the situation, but it may get better, it may not get better, and he may move on to another one. But you have to learn to accept that with equanimity of mind, without sorrow, without regret, and use that time and that opportunity to do your duty, express your love and affection, be other-centered, be compassionate, be altruistic towards that person, and help that person through these difficult times. Does that answer your question?
I mean, yes, logically it sounds, I mean, the mind understands, but it's still difficult, I mean, in day-to-day bearings to be totally altruistic.
Yes, but that is the journey that you have to make spiritually. The spiritual journey is that we often come across people who are apparently close to us who experience suffering. And we have to do our duty and our responsibility by them. But there is, of course, a limit. So, do we pray to God with desire or without desire? There's a verse which says, Akamo sarva kamo va moksha kama udaradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. Whether you have no desire, whether you're full of desire, or whether you desire moksha, in all circumstances, do approach God and worship Him. So I'll answer some of the other questions which are pending. What is the soul? Is it bigger than the universe? Individual soul, it has been described. Yatha prakashayate eka kritsnam imam lokam ravi. Tata kshetram kshetri kritsnam prakashayatyo bharata. Just like the sun, which is located in the solar system, illuminates the solar system. Similarly, the soul that is situated within your heart illuminates your body with consciousness. So, the individual soul is not bigger than the universe, but the universal soul of Brahman is far bigger than the universe. That is what is known as panentheism. I hope, sir, that your question is answered. Do we come to know that we are all connected with God? Is it only when we feel whatever I expected or asked God has been fulfilled? Or how do I come to know I'm connected and accepted by God? I think the simplest thing is when you have peace of mind, when you are fulfilled, when you're content, when ultimately you come to the realization you are a nobody who is doing nothing, then you will know that you are connected and accepted by God. When you are a nobody who's doing nothing, you will not have any desires except to fulfill the desires that God has for you. Then you will be connected with and accepted by God. Of course, God accepts you all the time, but you will find comfort when you realize this. I hope that answers your question. I believe Gita is a way of life to act rather than only believing in God by a discussion. As I said, whatever you speak on Gita is always correct because there are so many things that are contained within the Gita. So Gita is also a way of life. It is also about believing in God. In fact, it is about believing in God so that we can act in life in a far better and superior manner. Does it answer your question, sir? Is a man's life predetermined by his destiny or karma even before his birth? If yes, how does one cope with it and how do we change it? I am doing a full session, perhaps 2 sessions, on why bad things happen to good people. And when we do this, it will answer your question in greater detail. It will not do justice to your question if I give you a short answer now. It is better you wait until I give you the full discussion of perhaps 2 hours on why bad things happen to good people. Then your question will be answered better. I hope that is all right, sir. Our current mode of acquiring knowledge is through schools and colleges, and there's an emphasis on science and other rational subjects, particularly at the young age. How does one introduce the subject of spirituality and religion to young adults in a way that helps young adults learn about religion in a balanced way? See, many times when I give lectures on Bhagavad Gita, people come to me and say that, Doctor, that lecture you gave on Bhagavad Gita, that was perfect. It was meant for my wife, but she was not here. Or it was meant for my husband, but she was not here. Or it was just meant for my son, but I could not bring him here. Don't worry about other people. Just focus on remembering God and forgetting yourself. All the things in your life will automatically fall in place. All the things in your life will fall automatically in place. Your children will automatically become religious when they find that you are religious. It will be transferred to them by osmosis. The problem is that our behavior is so loud that our children cannot hear what we have to say. So as your behavior becomes more spiritual, automatically your children will become more spiritual. This is the answer. I hope, sir, this answers your question. I'm not taking anyone's name, so I hope you will understand when I'm answering your question. The entire process consists of a philosophy of life. It consists of moral and ethical behavior, and it consists of a meditative practice. If you need to practice all these 3 things, you need to have a philosophy of life, which you will get from Bhagavad Gita. You need to have, shall we say, moral and ethical behavior, which also we will discuss. And you need to have a meditative practice, which also we will discuss. Any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions?
Doctor, we'll take this last question, which has come from Vikas.
Yeah, the last question is, Sir, what is universal soul? So there are aspects of what we call as individual soul and the supreme soul as in Sankhya, and there is what we call as the universal soul as described in Vedanta. In Vedanta, it speaks of the one universal soul, which is known as Brahman. It is an all-pervading aspect of God. And we are simply a small particle of that universal soul. Next session will be on who is God. And when we discuss who is God, we will be discussing more about this universal soul concept. I hope you can hold on till then.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarkatti, for such a great start to the day.
So thank you. Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna. And I believe this is being recorded. So if you have the recording, maybe you can put it up for people who would like to access it and download it.
Yes, it is being recorded. We'll do that.
Right.
And we
So
will see you again on Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you. Hari Om.
Thanks, Doctor. Hari Om.
Yeah, Hari Om. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you.